Welcome to Application, the TYPO3 Community Podcast.
Hi, my name is Mathias Bolt Lesniak, and this is Application, the TYPO3 Community Podcast, sharing your stories, your projects, and the difference you make. Celebrate the TYPO3 community on Application, the TYPO3 Podcast. Meet the humans behind the technology.
1, 2. Welcome to Application, the TYPO3 Community Podcast. I'm Jeffrey A. McGuire. You can call me Jam. And this is where we celebrate the TYPO3 community, sharing your stories, talking about your projects and the difference you make in, around, and with TYPO3 CMS.
On today's episode of Application, the TYPO3 Community Podcast, I have a long and interesting conversation with Mathias Bolt Lesniak, who's been involved with TYPO3 since at least 2003. That's the first time he broke it. We'll talk about his history with the project, how he became part of the TYPO3 Association board. We go into a lot of his thinking about the value of TYPO3 and open source in the world and how to communicate that value, which is another one of his real passions. And for me, one of the real highlights was talking in quite concrete terms about how being part of an open source community and contributing and benefiting from contribution in an open source community can make the world a better place. I really hope you stick with this one and learn as much as I did when talking with Matthias. Thanks for listening. Welcome to Application, the TYPO3 Community Podcast. I am very pleased to be speaking today with my friend, Mathias Bolt Lesniak. Matthias, welcome. How are you today?
Thank you for having me. I'm doing great. Thank you.
So, we are speaking in the middle of 2021. It is still pandemic time. It's going up and it's going down. How's your pandemic been over the last year and more than a half?
Well, I actually have to say that I'm really happy right now because I'm going in a week's time for the first time in, 561 days, I'm going to physically touch a colleague, if I'm allowed, of course, but I'm going to physically see a colleague. That's fantastic.
Get consent first.
Yeah, I'm allowed now to go and visit the colleague or the colleagues.
It's really interesting because through this thing, I've missed being able to, frankly, to be able to be at events and do keynotes and presentations, and missed the interaction with people. And yet large groups of people, around large groups of people, I get very nervous right now. So don't know how that one's going to resolve itself. On the other hand, someone from Bonn got in touch with my company this week and asked about a workshop. And for the first time in how many days?
For me, it's 561. For you, it's probably a bit lower.
For the first time in more than 500 days, I could ask this person, hey, so that workshop that you're interested in, online or in person? And that felt really strange to ask. And to be honest, we're way better at online workshops right now than we are at in person. I don't even know where all the paper is anymore. So,
you know, there are certain things that actually work better online. Shorter meetings, for example, you know, you really get things concentrated because people can't just sit there and listen. But I find that it's one of the things I'm actually looking forward to is to go to people and have difficult conversations, because difficult emotional conversations, talking about topics that are hard but important,
right?
That's almost impossible online.
Tell me more about that.
You know, it is something I probably related to body language and those kind of things. But I find that when you can actually sit down with a person, you have the opportunity actually to look away. You have the opportunity to, you know, not always look straight at the person. You have the possibility to get up, draw on a whiteboard or blackboard, call in someone else to the room, get a second opinion. You really can't do that when you talk online. I mean, I'm
you
sure,
can, sort of.
Not really.
No.
Imagine now that we had a really interesting conversation and I just wanted to draw up some kind of process for you and we were to discuss it.
Yeah.
It would have been so much easier to actually be drawing on the same whiteboard or blackboard. And the same thing, if it is a really difficult conversation, then you really want to not only be able to hit someone in the face, you want to actually be able to sit down and physically read all of the signs about what's going on in the other person's head. One of the things I've discovered with doing online meetings is that I have to do a heck of a lot more acting. I have to act out my feelings. If I'm happy, I have to be really happy. And if I'm, serious, then I have to do something else.
It's definitely not just that you can read and receive more cues, but you can broadcast a lot more by stomping your foot or by drumming your fingers or by whatever it is, all the small signs. I've done remote work for so long that of course that's true, but I guess I'm just used to overacting. I have to say, though, that we are looking for a new office specifically. One of the reasons specifically because there's not enough room to effectively do whiteboarding and planning. And that physicality is for sure. I mean, Miro is a great platform, but it's still really, really hard to get that group energy going. It's an interesting challenge.
It is. And I think another thing, I mean, I've been working from home, 16, 17 18 years, which is less than you, but still
just a little bit. Only a little bit.
And what I've found is that people have actually learned now to be aware of online meetings. Previously, I could sit in a group with a group of people and I could, they were all in one room somewhere else. And I was in my room here and something would happen in the room. Someone would throw a practical joke or just say something that was inaudible for me. And everyone would laugh, ha, ha, ha. And I would sit there and feel stupid. That doesn't happen anymore. And that's really, really great. So we've really learned something.
So people are aware of this as a situation and whatever the consolation is, they're reacting to that. That's nice. On a very practical level, in this shifting ground between the pandemic and how long it's going to go on, and some people are going to want to meet in person. We've also had the sort of luxury of having way more time to get work done and having to sit much less time in trains and cars and planes, and the whole cost of working and cost of transferring information at the human level is quite different. I think for my company, that's been good. It's been nice that things have been more efficient and cheaper. But I wonder about the human element of that too. I think we've lost something by not having the events, but I'm not sure we've lost much not being able to go and do every client meeting in person. I think maybe that's mostly okay. Not
maybe
sure.
You've kept some clients.
Kept clients because they didn't have to put up with me in person?
Yeah, probably. Wouldn't you like to think that?
I would like to think even better things, to be honest. So, TYPO3 CMS. You are from Oslo, Norway. What was going on in your life when you found out about TYPO3?
I found out about TYPO3 not in Norway, of course, because at that point, Norway was probably the country with the highest number of CMSs per capita. Thinking back, if you were going to build a website, you built a CMS.
So many of us did it. So many of us did it. That made perfect sense in the late 90s, right? Early 2000s.
Yeah, definitely. It did. And I mean, I met TYPO3 for the first time in 2003 because I was going to make a website. And then someone I knew came and said, oh, there's this system you can use. It's using PHP and you can install it on the server. And these guys are using it and it's working really well. So I downloaded TYPO3, looked at the 1 or 2 million files or whatever it was at that time, and I started trying to use it. Of course, first I uploaded it to the server, which took just as long through FTP. And sort of got it running, and then I thought I should configure it and make it work in the way I wanted it to work. So there was some possibility to rename the TYPO3 folder. I think there was a configuration or something like that you could use. And I thought I should move that folder, rename it for security reasons. And I renamed it, and I crashed the entire TYPO3 install. And because, of course, TYPO3 was hard-coded into a lot of the code at that
into
point.
the strings and URLs, for sure.
And yeah, so I crashed my first TYPO3 installation. So I got really upset with TYPO3, and I think I sat for about 6 months and tried to write my own CMS. Of course, that's what you do, until I, had to crawl back and ask for forgiveness
and wipe your server and FTP upload it again.
Yeah, and I think I actually tried to write that CMS in BASIC, which was not the thing to do.
Wow. That's an interesting choice. Now, two things about what you've just said. You said you didn't find it in Norway. Where did you find it?
I was in Switzerland at that point, falling in love with my soon-to-be wife.
And soon-to-be CMS.
Yes, you meet all of the important people in Switzerland. That's what Switzerland is there for. Forget about the rest of the world. That's where I was, yeah.
Can you name any of the other CMSs that were floating around at the time?
No, because I think a lot of them were actually just proprietary closed source solutions. So a few years later, you had, what's it called? That precursor to Joomla. It was called Mambo, yeah.
Thinking about the early 2000s, it was perfectly normal for any given agency with an ambitious CTO or any given ambitious developer to go and write her own CMS because, that made sense. I'll just do this thing to organize my files, and I'll just do this thing to organize that, and then I'll be able to get on with my work. But it either ate them alive and cost them a lot over the years or whatever, or it was big and successful like TYPO3 and Mambo and Drupal and some of the others. It was so interesting how many of them floating around were, and it was really interesting then through the 2010s and teens, how many of those were left and how many there are now. And I bet there aren't very many now anymore. In the old days, I would ask people, so how many people in the room wrote their own CMS? And a surprising number of hands would go up. And then I would say, and how many of you are still running clients on that? And there was always one or two people who are yeah, because of course we were at a CMS conference or a PHP conference or whatever. So that was fun. What's your first positive TYPO3 memory?
There are really two things that really stayed with me in my relationship with TYPO3 all the way since the very beginning. And it's two things, actually. It's one thing is the page tree, and the other thing is content elements. It's just so ingenious. Firstly, you get all of your structure in one place. And the second thing is you can actually put multiple types of functionality and content on the same page without, reconfiguring the page like you at least had to do back then in pretty much every other CMS. You had to, if you were going to have a news listing, you had to create a news listing page. And if you were going to have a form page, you had to, that's just so good and so nice. And I really get this wonderful warm feeling in my tummy each time I open up TYPO3 and see the page tree and the content elements. Still,
right, the content elements have really proven themselves as well. It's so interesting how they're like tiny encapsulated bits of functionality as well as being semantic information or whatever else they're doing at the same time. Yeah, that's a good point. Tell us who you are and what you do.
I'm Mathias Bolt Lesniak. I am a board member in the TYPO3 Association, and when I'm not that, doing other stuff, I work at Pixelant. I'm the Pixelant office in Norway.
And what is Pixelant?
Pixelant is a Swedish web agency. It's actually a brand of a larger agency called Resultify. They're based in Malmö in Sweden, with another office with developers in Lviv in the Ukraine.
Okay, so a nice big agency, and you do TYPO3 there.
I do Typo3 there, and well, of course, I do a lot of opinionated reactions to things that happen other places in the company too. And I try to. I mean, I'm really, I really love marketing, which is another thing that we do, and I really love copywriting, which is another thing that we do. And
Right.
you know, I can't stop putting my finger in other people's work.
There are a couple of potentially great titles for this episode now. I think the best one is Meet Mathias Bolt Lesniak, Opinionated Comments, Norway, right? Or TYPO3 Association Board Member and Sticking My Fingers in Stuff.
That's sort of how I originally got into the TYPO3 Association board. Because I was, at that point, my boss, Robert Lynn, was in the advisory board. I was complaining to him about, you know, there's so much different spellings. There's so much strange going on in the news on the website. We need to, you know, it needs to be proofread. We need some kind of project for that. And we need to improve the communication for TYPO3. And so he spoke very loudly about me, probably at some meeting. And I was asked then to come into the TYPO3 Association board to work with external communication, which is what I'm still doing. Just that now I've been voted in instead of just being asked to come.
You were volunteered in. Somebody volunteered you.
Forcibly volunteered.
It sounds like you were doing some borderline red flag open source behavior. My classic moment is when anyone says, somebody should. And whatever they say after, I'm ready to say, I'm so glad you're volunteering to do that. You know, in other communities with a benevolent dictator, it is name of benevolent dictator should fix this, do that, know that, right? Or company X. Yep. It's a classic. So since your first TYPO3 experience was uploading it to a server and then immediately breaking it, what pitfall should other people know about and know to avoid when they're picking up TYPO3 and learning now?
Based on mine, don't upload using FTP. That's
right.
I can't recommend that. Definitely try to get it running before you start really playing with the settings.
Okay. All right.
I mean, use some kind of guidebook, for example. Take
product placement.
Have a good starting point. Install the Bootstrap package, a T3 kit, or something like that, and start with something that's actually set up. And then you can go in there and you can start trying to break things one item at a time, and then just make sure that you revert if something breaks.
And make backups and use version control if you possibly can. Friends, don't let friends not use version control. Nice plug, by the way, for the TYPO3 Guidebook, which I was part of creating to help new people learn and find out about the community and avoid some pitfalls, actually.
Yeah, so we should actually talk more about the guidebook as well, I think. So
should we?
On your list.
Well, that's an elegant segue. Tell me about the TYPO3 Guidebook, Matthias.
Well, the TYPO3 Guidebook is the book that's supposed to save me from crashing my next TYPO3 installation, pretending that I'm new to TYPO3. I've read a lot of books about starting using a CMS, or about how to develop for a CMS, or how to learn certain things in PHP, and those are all good books. But the TYPO3 Guidebook is really the first book that I've seen that really takes a holistic perspective to the whole using a CMS in your agency. It doesn't just show you how to set up your first website. It does that, but that's actually a smaller part of the book, in my opinion. What it does is that it also tells you what TYPO3 is, what are the great selling points for TYPO3. And one of the chapters that I love the most as well is that it also tells you how to start a business using TYPO3, how to start interfacing with the open source community, with the TYPO3 community, how to involve yourself in the work that can help you become better in using TYPO3 as the professional content management system that it really, really is.
Right. I like that. It's one of many parts of the book that give a lot more context. It's interesting that you mention it. I certainly hadn't thought of it as we were working on it, and I was part of the team that channeled community knowledge and experience into this book, and that's the community creation of the book is something I'm really proud of to have been able to facilitate that process. But the context of the material that's in there, it is more than like, once installed, set your such and so variable to this and a timeout that, and then make sure when you go into production to change the caching to ta, 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 ta. And it's like, okay, maybe if I have a full and complete understanding of what the web is for and why I'm doing web publishing and whatever, and I just need that, fine, but I can look in the documentation for that. We put the book together in two halves, and the first half is 4 chapters that honestly say, okay, here is the web, and this is web publishing, and you know what? Here's how you can think about setting up a web design project, and when you need a site, and here's a thought process about you need this before and you need this after, and don't forget about, and then also where is TYPO3 in this context, and who are the people, and what does the community look like? And it's so much more than just configuring PHP variables, right? And then the 10 sort of practical chapters that make up the second half of the book. One of them is to start a business. My favorite is actually probably, and there's like, okay, how to write an extension, and we have an opinionated, a few different ways that we thought were best practices and represented a very good path to configure, to customize, to extend, to make a private user area, tutorials like that. One was about starting your business around an open source CMS. And to be honest, you could fill in the name of something else, and it was still really solid advice. My favorite was the security and debugging chapter, which was also, a dozen pages or wherever it came out of the principles of finding and isolating and fixing security issues and bugs, and not specifically like TYPO3 stores this in this folder and you have to blah, blah, blah. It's like, here's a pattern, here's how to think about it. And I really, really like that. I really like how that sort of stuff came out.
So the TYPO3 Guidebook is actually then a book that you can give to anybody in your business. And you can even give it to your mom and dad or wife or whatever, if they wonder what TYPO3 is or how they can use it. It will even inform marketing and salespeople about how they can talk to customers about TYPO3. And
right,
that holistic approach is really great, and I think it's also a good description of the TYPO3 community as well. The TYPO3 community it's not just nerds sitting and typing all day. Do have some of those, but there are a lot of other people as well, and quite a broad section of society involved in TYPO3, which is super.
I like to call it a vibrant professional community, and I like that it's vibrant, and I like that it's professionals. And for an open source community, it's quite well focused and quite low conflict, and a lot of the energy goes into having a great professional tool and making that tool better and making it available to more people. And I love the community structure, how the association and the community work together. And as a community, we have the means to have a real mentoring program, and we have the means to go and help governments in Africa with web infrastructure and like all the other cool projects that are going on. It's really exciting. So it is a really nice balance in there. TYPO3 Guidebook, A-Press, available on paper and as an ebook. Cool. What is the coolest thing you ever built with TYPO3?
Actually, there are different levels of cool. You can be cool from the way of, wow, I built a website and it has this really amazing content on it. That's one approach. You can also, build some kind of functionality and say that, wow, that was fantastic. That's like the best functionality I've ever seen. And so you have to choose some angle to that. There is this thing with software development, and I do software development. There's this concept of scratching your itch. And over the last year, I've worked on some really cool technologies for the product manager, which is huge extension that we make at Pixelant. That's also on the extension repository. And we're working on version 10. It's taken a lot longer than we thought. those kind of things. But we've done a few things there that are really, really cool, and that, I want to jump up and down when I hear about them, because they solve some of these problems that I've had with TYPO3. Just to take one of those, we built something called rendering stacks. It's based on an old idea I had once upon a time, but I never really got time to do it. If you work with TYPO3 and you work with fluid templates, you know that you often have to modify a template in order to put something new into it. So let's say that you want a button from another plugin to suddenly appear somewhere in a template, partial, something like that. And then you have to create your own override template, and you have to maintain that template separately. Well, what rendering stacks does is that they introduce a little view helper that you can put into any template. And when that is rendered, the view helper looks for declared keys for other templates that should be put in here. So you can use TypoScript to define what you want into this. You define the sort of put any button in here. And then you can put in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 100 buttons into that space just by defining them, declaring them in TypoScript, which is nice. Really important for the product module. We can suddenly have a separate compare extension that we can install, and then it automatically puts buttons into the template without us having to change the original templates, which is so much easier.
And way more maintainable. So I'm hearing that that's like a tokenized dependency injection kind of a pattern.
Yeah, call it that.
Well, that is pretty darn cool. So that means that these templates can basically remain whole. You put in a placeholder there, and then you can also change out whatever that is whenever you need without breaking anything else.
Yeah.
All right. And tell me about the time that you gave yourself your biggest wow, I programmed that moment.
I'm never surprised by my own knowledge and achievements.
No. How humble are you really? Don't hold back.
That's a really good question. Again, that comes from, you can have different angles that will give you different answers. I had a time, just to take something that's not now, I had a time when I tried to write everything in TypoScript. Also, more or less functionality, just tried to plug it in. So I actually made a rather complex extension, you can call it, just by combining form handler and TypoScript. So I built forms and created listings and all of those things just with TypoScript. And that was the important thing for me, was that was the time when I really understood TypoScript. And I've loved it ever since.
Okay.
But I don't make those kind of extensions anymore.
Well, I mean, it does sound like abuse would have the wrong connotation, but it certainly seems to be like pushing a bunch of boundaries that you might have reconsidered as you've grown older and wiser.
Exactly. But actually, the starting point with it was that I want to build something that is low maintenance. And TypoScript is low maintenance because it's being kept pretty much the same forever. So you can just make something that connects with something else that somebody else maintains, and then you can expect it to live forever. Which it didn't, because form handler didn't live forever.
Right. Well, things do get updated often for good reasons. If you had to talk about a technology right now that's exciting or interesting to you, that's not TYPO3, but still on the web, what would it be?
my.typo3.org.
Great.
That's written in Symfony, so I'm allowed to say that.
Okay. So what does that do for us?
Well, you can't do everything in TYPO3, and I think that's a really important realization as well, that TYPO3 is good at a lot of things, but you can't really force TYPO3 into being something that it isn't. And if it's not based on a page structure, and if it's not in need of content management, TYPO3 is sort of not the target anymore. And then Symfony, which of course TYPO3 is using a lot, is a good basis as well. But the reason why I like my.typo3.org and that project, which has been driven now by the typo3.org team and the Typo3 company for quite some while, is that what's being built there is a central place to manage your membership and everything that has to do with you within the Typo3 ecosystem. And that kind of central profile is really, really useful. And one of the things I'm really excited about that is coming sometime. I've been saying that it's coming in a few months for many years now, but which I really, it's one of these things that you really wish could just be there at once. And that is the Karma Points project. So trying to visualize people's contribution to Typo3, and not only code contribution, but people who write articles, people who put things into the documentation, people who come to events. And I mean, that's a really important thing to think about when you are in an open source community.
Yes.
Just that someone come to an event is actually a contribution to the community. If you're new, taking that step across the threshold and actually coming to an event is something that you should be valued for. And so getting Karma Points, which is the name, for doing different things in the community and visualizing that is really important. That also means, which is the second really exciting thing about this project, is that makes it possible for you, if you want to show your points. So you can say that, well, I'm this involved. I've done, lots of things. Even though you're not necessarily coding, you can show that you have an involvement. And the business you work for, the agency you work for, can collect all of those points and say that, well, this is what the people who work for us do for Typo3, which is another way of showing involvement.
Right. Now, when someone changes agencies, does that first agency lose the points, or are they going to stay there?
The details haven't been really discussed yet, but what I would like to see would be that the business keeps the points that you have, that the employee has given while they're working for you. Of course, if this is only free time, you wouldn't have gotten any points anyway. It's up to the employee to say that, well, this is actually something that I'm doing for my job. But then when you start working somewhere else, that would become visible for the other agency. So from the first day you work at the new agency, you start collecting points for that agency.
Right. So there's a grammar to commit comments, basically, about who did the work, where were they working at the time, perhaps who was paying for the work at the time, kind of all of those. It's going to be a 5-dimensional, really cool, interesting graph.
Very. And we've started also collecting that information already, so that when it comes, we can go back in time as well. Maybe we go a year back or something and collect information. So if you go to typo3.org today and see that somebody's written an article, that is a data point that we can use. Okay, somebody's contributed an article to typo3.org, but if you scroll further down, just before you get to the discussions, you will also see people like me who have published the article. That's also sometimes a bit of work, and who has proofread it, for example.
Okay, that's cool. That's cool. Speaking of contribution and really valuable non-code contribution, can you tell us about the Typo3 mentoring program?
I can. I'm not the biggest expert, but I've been a part of sort of designing it, you could say. The person who's really put the most work into that program is Daniel Homeradian. The mentorship program is really about connecting people who don't know much or anything about Typo3 with people who know about Typo3, and putting them through a 12-course educational program with 12 lessons, that you could call it, and teach them how to get started with Typo3. So we've done that a lot with thus for people from Central Africa. We've done it with people from Cuba and the rest of Latin America. And we're looking at getting more people from the rest of the world. But the point here is that if you have an agency that needs to find a professional CMS that you can use for your clients. It's quite an investment for you to just go and say, well, I'm going to choose TYPO3, because nobody in your organization will know anything about it. So the mentorship program places you in the possibility, and of course, it's not only for agencies, it's also for freelancers. But let's say you're in an agency, then you can say that, well, this employee is going to be a part of the mentorship program. You can sign that person up, and that person will have someone from the TYPO3 community who knows TYPO3 as their mentor. And they will go through then 12 lessons over usually about 12 weeks and learn the core fundamentals of TYPO3, and where you get a hosting environment that you can play around with. The thing about this is that it's not just, someone giving away their time either. This is actually an investment from the TYPO3 Association into growing the community, where the mentors are actually, if they want to receive it, they can also get a small payment from the association for doing this, because we know that if we put money into teaching people TYPO3, that is something that can give a really lasting result, a legacy for TYPO3 in that agency.
Nice.
And that's
okay. Wow.
Getting that first help to learn TYPO3 is really important. And TYPO3 is one of these CMSs that really, really needs a greater involvement from countries outside of Central Europe, the TYPO3 developing world, as I call it.
And because TYPO3 is open source, and because TYPO3 is to a very large extent written in the most popular and web standard languages and technologies, and is absolutely clean and on the front end of where web publishing is going, it's a wonderful opportunity to give people a career, the ability to support themselves and their family. Anyone who can get to a computer and get online has the chance to support themselves, make a difference in their own country, help other businesses, all of these wonderful enablers. The work that so many people have put in all through the years, making this system rock solid, and then handing their best ideas in to the community for multiplication and reuse. I really love being parts of stories like that.
But Jam, it's actually bigger than that.
There's more.
Yes. There's so much really exciting going on. So the thing that we can see with our involvement in building TYPO3 is that we're not only building like it would be with a commercial CMS. If we were a commercial CMS, we would gladly pay people to learn TYPO3 in developing countries, for example, and medium income countries, because we would then know that there would be a market for our CMS. Someone would pay or buy our licenses. We would get lots of money back.
Yep.
But what happens when TYPO3 goes into a country? What we are doing right now with Rwanda, for example, also one of these wonderful projects that Daniel has been working on, by helping the Rwandan government use TYPO3 and help agencies in Rwanda learn TYPO3, we are creating independent businesses that can stand on their own feet and earn their own money. None of the money that comes into an agency in, let's say, Rwanda will have to be paid back to TYPO3 unless, you can buy a membership, but it's not as much as you would pay for a license, for example. What that does is that it creates a community in a country. From the open source perspective, what we'll see then as well is that we get companies that have their needs, have their wants, and who develop software that we get back. So we get maybe new types of software, but something really exciting as well happens in addition to that, which I really love, which is that a community like TYPO3 is built around a democracy. So in order to work in the Typo3 community and be active and really contribute, you have to understand the concepts of democracy and decision making and all of those things, and how this is working within Typo3. You can set up your own organizations in your own country. And what you do is that you're building civil society and you're educating developers about democracy. That is democracy building. And that's what Typo3, especially Typo3, because we have such a flat structure, we can bring people in at almost any level and make them feel a part of the democratic processes very early on.
That's so
and imagine that. That's a really, really amazing type of development aid. Instead of just sitting here and earning money, we are putting seeds of democracy into places that really need to have their civil society developed, because that's one of the things that we see in developing countries. Building civil society, building organizations where people have to have some kind of democratic structure in that microcosm also helps the macrocosmic democracy building in that country and in that region. And because this is also something they can work on and earn money from, building local websites, working for local institutions, it's democracy and it's building independent business.
As open source practitioners, sharing this knowledge and enabling others, this is not only enlightened self-interest, but we are leading by example, right? Sharing our best ideas, helping each other out, showing that you can compete or disagree with someone and still believe in the same principles and still work to better goals, choosing which way you solve a problem in open source software by making rational arguments and whatever, as you point out, is very similar to having a policy discussion in a democratic setting. And in Typo3, you're not going to win that argument by calling the other person names and yelling and screaming and creating controversy. You're going to win it by saying, no, if we implement it with this library, that gets us that, and it's faster, and it's whatever it is. That is such an interesting comparison. I have not thought of that before. I think that the level that I stopped at is still important. And to me, I think of the immediate potential economic impact on an individual, her family, her town, her society. On an economic level, I think of that as a kind of 0 point energy. If we can get online and use a computer that works online now, we can generate economic value out of a pool that open source contributors have been filling since the 90s for us, right? And it becomes more and more valuable over time the more people use it. Lots of big, heavy stuff on this episode. Matthias Bolt Lesniak, are you ready for our quick fire question round?
Never been readier, but don't feel particularly ready, but shoot.
What one word would you use to describe Typo3?
Democracy.
What is your favorite feature of Typo3?
I have two. It's page tree and the content elements.
What feature would you like to see added to Typo3?
I would like to see more bling, more things that people can see and, just see and love.
Because some of it's kind of subtle, right?
Some of it's kind of subtle, but I'm trying to keep my answers short here too.
Okay.
Yeah, bling, like something that's shiny. When you try to sell a content management system to a new customer, that customer needs something that generates positive feelings in them, because positive feelings are important for what emotions you're left with, and that isn't always just the technical stuff. It needs to be, wow, that's easy, or wow, that's really nice. Oh, I've been looking for that. And Typo3 has some of those features already, but they need to be more in your face. And I've been doing a lot of development work on front-end editing for Typo3, for example. And front-end editing is, it's one of these things that you will never use when you're a really experienced Typo3 user, because it's too simple. But sitting down and trying to sell TYPO3 to a customer who has never seen TYPO3, it's a lot easier to take 30 seconds, sit them down, show them the webpage, click somewhere in the text and start writing. And the customer is then thinking, wow, that's easy.
Yeah.
And
when I change it here, it changes it everywhere. Boom, boom.
Yes, and it gives that emotional positive vibe, which is really important. And it is easy to forget when you're a developer or when you're someone who has been working with TYPO3 for quite a while. And we have that challenge in TYPO3 that I often compare to the World Health Organization. The World Health Organization, they look a lot like TYPO3, actually. They have two big things that they're working with. They're working with obesity and lack of food, hunger. Those are not compatible in many cases. You can't go out to the whole world and say, eat less, you're too obese, because there's so many people who are hungering and what they need is to know what actually get food to eat. And TYPO3 is really, really strong in the German-speaking world, which is a terrific starting point because we have really the resources there, we have the people there, we can show that it's working. But the way that you sell TYPO3 to a German is very different to how you sell it to a Swedish business, for example, because in Germany, TYPO3 is already at the top of the list for very many businesses who want a new website. Yep. But if you go to Sweden, they've very often not heard about TYPO3 at all, or they've heard something 10 years ago that was maybe even wrong. In order to grow TYPO3 abroad, as I say, in the part of the world that needs to develop TYPO3 presence, you need something that are easy conversion points for people, things that just introduce them to TYPO3 and make them feel that they want to know more. And TYPO3 has so many strong features, but you can't go there at once.
They're not packaged in a way that makes them like the boom, 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 beautiful demo, right?
Yeah, and you can always look down on quick sells and sales pitches, but the important thing to remember is that if you haven't got people's attention at the first moment you talk to them, they're not going to listen, at least not in the same way, when you tell them about the really important stuff later on. It's like when you hold a presentation, for example, it's a very good idea to tell a joke or a story, because at the point when people laugh or something after a few minutes, the other people who haven't been listening in will actually come online and start listening. So it's about creating the space for showing the really powerful features that are within TYPO3.
Right. So when you say bling, you want to be able to generate enthusiasm quicker.
Yes, and
excite people.
Yeah, and making people curious, I can say, wow, I've got this really big diamond here. And people go, wow. And then I say, well, but now you're going to hear the story about this diamond. But now you've got them listening.
And it has a page tree and content elements.
Yeah. The first diamond with content elements.
What feature would you like to see removed from TYPO3?
That's an impossible question. I'm gonna, it's like this thing about backups. The moment you delete a file and think you're never gonna use it anymore, someone's gonna come and tell you, "Do you have that file?"
They base their entire business on that.
Yeah. So I mean, the way to make people use all of the features in TYPO3 is actually to remove them, and then people are going to ask to have them back.
Because they'll scream, all of a sudden you'll find out how many users there really
never use this feature, but you really have to have it in because I need it now.
All right. Can you tell us something you wish people knew about TYPO3, but they usually don't? How about the people
I made someone really excited this summer.
Okay. Tell us about your vacation.
For one night this summer, driving down towards hell, which, on my way south, after being at my wonderful holiday house in Northern Norway. We got to stay at this wonderful, amazing farm in Trøndelag, in sort of central Norway, middle Norway. I don't know what you want to call it. And I talked to this guy
downtown Norway, right?
That's not downtown Norway. It's sort of 2/3 of the way up, but it looks like halfway. And he asked me what I'm working with. And I can say I work with development and all those kind of things. And I make websites and stuff. But what really excited him was when I started talking about how open source is democracy, and how really by using TYPO3, you participate in a community effort that gives you a lot of possibilities and a lot of freedoms, that also should require something back from you as well in involvement.
Give me an example of that.
You can download TYPO3. You can install it. You can set up a website. And that's fine. Nobody really asks you to do anything more. There comes a point, it's do not ask what TYPO3 can do for you. Ask what you can do for TYPO3. At the point when you find out, or when you start actually giving back, when you start involving yourself in the community, when you start taking your solutions for your itches, those things that you have, and you start spreading them out to others, and you get others to improve on it, when you make improvements on stuff that others done, that's when you really get the benefit of TYPO3. That's when you enter into an exchange that is mutually beneficial, and it's not a zero-sum thing. It's a benefit for both people. And I mean, it goes back to the basics of, monetary science, that, if I want to buy something from you, that's because you want the money more than I do, and I want what you have more than. And
right.
That exchange, being able to work on something that you're actually not paying for, but starting to give what you have made out to the world without necessarily expecting something back. That's when things turn. It is, to me, it is a very good picture of selfless love. That can sound tacky, but hear me out, because, and I've talked about this in a couple of presentations that I've done, but let's say I have a friend. Everyone hopefully has some kind of friend, but the important thing here is I have something as well. I have a garden full of rubbish. My friend has a pickup. I don't have a car because I don't need a car usually. But now when I have my garden full of rubbish, I need someone to help me drive that away. And my friend says, yeah, sure. Just put it in my pickup. I'll help you. I'll drive it off. And we do that because we're friends. That's what friends do. And friends don't expect anything back. Friendships are based on giving something to people without expecting something back. But it still gives you something back, because it generates so much. So that's the thing with TYPO3. I have something really great that I've developed. I give it to the world because I know even that. I just give it away. And the world will also give me something because I'm part of this circle of love, to call it that, where everyone just gives and everyone receives without actually tracking the transactions.
But blending in the Lion King circle of life music under this.
Yes.
If I had the rights to it, which I don't. That is such a powerful, amazing answer to that question of what is it that people don't know about TYPO3? And frankly, this applies, of course, to open source, right? It's such a powerful answer. That expands on and fills gaps in between things that I've thought myself for years, but that's so great. Thank you for that. We have a little thing that we like to call the Suggest a Guest. Whom should the people listening have a chance to meet?
I'm suggesting Steve O'Rourke from New Zealand, because I know that both you and I have a very close relationship to New Zealand, and New Zealand is very far away, and actually putting a light on the community members that are farthest away is really important.
Okay.
When you really have a dynamic community, things happen at the edges and it's silent in the center. And I think it's really important. The real needs, what people really need from TYPO3, and the things that really make people choose TYPO3, although they're maybe the only people on their island, the only people in their country, we need to listen to them because they have perspectives that are very important and are going to be vital for TYPO3 going forward.
I can think of a few community members who kind of fit that definition. That's a great project. Maybe we can make an outliers series where it's the small community members from around the world who come and tell us about how that experience is. That would be cool.
They can be big too.
How do you mean?
They're not the little people.
Right. Now, when I talk about my sense of humor, I almost always do giant air quotes because the things that I find amusing, other people often find peculiar. However, my screen is not big enough to do the air quotes that I need to talk about yours. So thank you for your time, Matthias. Cool. Super good to talk with you. Glad you're back.
Thanks to the TYPO3 Association for sponsoring this podcast. Thank you B13 and Stephanie Kreutzer for our logo. Merci beaucoup Patrick Gaumont, TYPO3 developer and musician extraordinaire, for our theme music. Thanks again to today's guest. If you liked what you heard, don't forget to subscribe in the podcast app of your choice and share Application, the TYPO3 community podcast, with your friends and colleagues. If you didn't like it, please share it with your enemies. Would you like to play along and suggest a guest for the podcast? Do you have questions or comments? Reach out to us on Twitter at TYPO3 Podcast. You can find show notes, links, and more information in our posts on typo3.org. Remember, open source software would not be what it is without you. Thank you all for your contributions.
Hello, my name is Matthias, and this is Application, the sewing podcast. We are going to stitch Application today, sharing your stories and your projects, and the difference you make sewing your applications.
Thank you. We'll call you.